In this video, I'm testing Retell and Lindy in 7 areas from ease of use and telephony options to latency, pricing, and hidden costs to see which is the better platform for building voice AI agents. I'll also link to a side-by-side comparison below with all the results, and you can plug in your requirements to see which tool's the better fit for you. So let's start with Retell AI. So Retell AI is one of the easiest platforms to build voice agents on, particularly if you're a beginner. So from their platform, you can create an agent up here, go to voice agent, and you got a few options. Now, the templates are very good in Retell. Generally, I recommend starting with a conversational flow agent. This means you can build your voice agent out on a nice visual canvas. This also has some benefits from a latency perspective because it means rather than sticking one gigantic prompt that is being sent with every call to the LLM, you can break your prompt out into different steps, giving your voice agent only the context that it needs at each step of the conversation. So I'll just show you kind of how that looks. If we go into conversational flow agent, we'll create that. And I'll talk through a couple of kind of key features and concepts in Retell as we go. So here you can see the main visual canvas that you build out your voice agents on, and you can enter your prompts into any of these nodes. Then you got your different node options down the left here. So you can add a call transfer node. We can add functions, which I'll touch on in a second. Conversation nodes, SMS, extracting variables, MCP connections. Again, I'll touch on in a moment. You enter in the prompt or a static sentence, and then you can set up your transition. Then you can set up your transition. Then you can enter here. Then you enter in your transitions, which is just the kind of the possible outcome, the possible things the caller could say at that step. And then you just connect them to the different nodes. Then if you click into any node, you've got all the options for how to configure that node. So if we go into this one, for example, we'll see you could change the LLM it uses, for example. We can add knowledge to it. We can make it a global node, which means that the agent can decide to jump to that node at any point in the conversation. Just on that point, there's 2 different nodes for building. In Retell, you can either have rigid mode where it follows the flow quite precisely. This is pretty good if you have a very predictable conversational flow and you essentially want it to follow a script. Or you've got flex mode, which allows for a little bit of variability and means that if we're going down this path, but someone suddenly mentions something that has a path over here, it gives the agent the autonomy to jump between different nodes. So as you can see, it's visually very intuitive. So let's touch on telephony and voice options. So the default voice engine that Retell uses is ElevenLabs, which is the one that I would generally recommend. You do have a few other options like Cartesia, Minimax, OpenAI Voices, but generally speaking, for most agents, you're likely going to want to use ElevenLabs. You can also add in your own custom voice. So if you've paid for either an instant or a professional voice on ElevenLabs, you can just enter in your voice ID here from ElevenLabs, pop in an API key, then your voice agent can use your voice. You can also create a voice clone directly inside Retell, so you can drop in some audio files here, and then that will create an instant voice in ElevenLabs. So I'll play you an example in a moment of a voice agent I've actually built. If we go back out of here, I'll just touch on telephony while we're out here as well. So Retell do make it pretty easy to connect phone numbers to your agent, and you can buy them from within the platform. So phone numbers cost $2 a month. Now, slight downside here, if you're outside the US and Canada, you'll need to import your phone numbers either via Twilio or Telnix or ZipTrunk. But it's pretty straightforward. It takes literally a couple of minutes to get a phone number and verify it, and you can then connect it to one of your agents. This, by the way, works for both inbound and outbound agents. So you can either have people call that number or you can make calls from that number. So let's just jump into one of these agents and I'll show you a quick example of the voice realism. So let's go into this dental outbound agent. So one of my favorite things about Retell is testing. Some voice AI tools, you have to actually have it call your mobile device, which racks up costs and credits. And it's also just a bit clunky to keep doing that. Whereas Retell make it really easy. You can just click test agent and you can either chat with your agent, which is kind of handy if you're in a public place and you don't want to look insane having this conversation back and forth with your agent. Or you can test the audio and you literally just click test.
Hi, this is Grace from South Bay Dental Office. I'm reaching out regarding the form you submitted to learn more about our teeth cleaning package. Am I speaking with Marcus?
Yes.
I'm following up to see if you're still interested in our teeth cleaning package.
No, I'm all good, thank you. So as you can see, really simple. And it's nice that it visually kind of shows you which step of your workflow it's going down, so you can make sure that it's going through all those routes as you would expect. The voice quality, also pretty good. That was using CMO, which is just the default ElevenLabs options, but there's tons of different options that you can choose from here. So let's touch on one of the things that is less good about Retell. Integrations. So Retell, of course, if you are technical, you can connect this to absolutely anything using webhooks or using Model Context Protocol. But if you are non-technical, your options are a bit more limited. Retell don't have much in the way of native integrations. So if you want to connect it to something, you can add a function. And cow.com is basically the only native integration you will find on Retell.com. What I would say is that cow.com is kind of a bridge between various different calendar software. So if you want to connect Retell to Google Calendar or Outlook Calendar, for example, you can connect those into cow.com. So this is sort of like a Google Calendar integration, albeit indirectly. But that is it. Of anything other than a calendar integration, you're going to need to get your hands dirty, either by building a custom function where you trigger a HTTP request, or by connecting it into an MCP server, which is not massively difficult. And in some ways, this means the world is your oyster because virtually every tool now has its own MCP server. And all you need to do is enter the MCP server URL and then any headers or query parameters that you need to authenticate it. But I do point it out because it is a relative weakness of Retell. Most voice AI tools I use have a much broader range of native integrations, but Retell does not. So that brings me on to another point, which is concurrency. So this is an important concept when building voice agents because particularly if you're doing outbound calls or if you have busy periods and quiet periods, if you have 10 customers all calling you at once, you don't want to only have one phone line that means everyone's kind of on hold for ages. So by default, you can have up to 20 concurrent calls on Retell, which is pretty generous. And they've also got this handy feature called concurrency burst, where if you get a sudden influx of calls, instead of putting everyone on hold or forcing you to buy extra phone lines, you just pay a slightly higher rate. And this works for up to 3 times your normal limit. So essentially 60 concurrent calls. If you consistently have a higher number of concurrent calls, you're running a call center, for example, you can, of course, adjust your limit and it costs $8 per additional concurrent phone line, which again is pretty reasonable. So let's talk about latency. So the first thing I really like about Retell is they make this transparent. This is not true of all voice AI platforms. So when you're building your voice agent, you can see up here in the top bar the estimated latency for your agent. And this is quite handy because it gives you an indication if you suddenly add a really massive global prompt, that's going to push up the latency. You can also see things, for example, like changing the model, either using the fast tier or something like GPT 4.1 Nano. You should see an instant reduction in the latency. And generally, from my experience with Retell, it is slightly on the pessimistic side. So generally, I find that my actual latency is often slightly better than this. So coming on to that point, if you go into your call logs, you can see your actual latency. And another thing I really like about this is you can see the breakdown. So you don't just get this kind of one number. So here you can see 756 milliseconds, which is roughly what I see on average. So when I've done standardized latency testing across different tools, I believe with Retell, I was getting 714 milliseconds of end-to-end latency. That is not the best I've seen, but it is still very good. It's still in the realms of sounding natural and being very usable for a production voice agent. The thing I really like is that if you hover over here, you can get the breakdown of where that latency is happening. So you can see, is it at the speech to text stage? Is it the LLM or is it at the text to speech voice engine? And this is really helpful because it tells you where the problem is and therefore what you can do to improve and optimize it. This is quite rare to see in voice agent platforms. There's only 1 or 2 other platforms I can think of that actually give you this information. And for me, this just tells me like Retell is not trying to hide anything. They're giving you this information so you can do something with it and actually make your voice agent better. So in this case, for example, it's clear that we do not have a latency problem at the transcription stage, but we might want to tighten up our prompts or use a different model for the LLM inference. And possibly we might want to have a play around with the voice engine, but big wins are going to be at the LLM stage. So just really helpful. Now let's touch on costs. Now, generally speaking, when you add everything up, so like the LLM costs, telephony costs, etc., Retell comes out around about 13 cents per minute. Now, obviously, that is going to depend on the model you choose, the telephony options. There's dozens of things that affect this number, but generally for a standard tech stack, so GPT 4.1, DeepGram transcription, and 11 Labs Turbo V2, this is roughly going to be about right. It is not the absolute cheapest option for voice agents, but it's generally very reasonable. Anything under about 15 cents per minute is pretty decent. So for me, Retell is a really solid option. It gets a lot of the boring stuff like testing, latency, concurrency. It gets all these things right, but it also just makes it really easy to build production quality voice agents. So if you're non-technical, if you like building in no code and you don't want to be in the weeds building voice agents via an API, Retell for me is about as good as it gets. So next up, let's have a look at Lindy. So Lindy AI is more a general AI automation platform for building AI agents that happens to have Lindy Phone, which is a voice agent tool within it. So it's not necessarily an apples and apples comparison here because Lindy is not just a platform for building voice agents. There's a lot more you can do with it. That said, a lot of people using Lindy are using it because it was one of the early platforms to allow you to build automation workflows that incorporated voice AI. So building voice agents in Lindy is really straightforward. I'll just show you a quick example. Go into this AI virtual assistant. And if you go into the flow editor, you can see you've got this nice kind of visual canvas where you can build out your agents. So each box is an AI agent and you can give them access to Lindy Phone, which is a tool that allows it to make calls or receive calls. So if we click into here, we can see we've got the prompt set for the agent. And down here, we've given it this skill to make phone calls. So if we go into here, we can then configure this. So you got a few things you can customize. Of course, you can customize the model that it's using as well as the phone number that it's calling from. So you can buy phone numbers directly in the Lindy platform. You don't have as many options of importing them from things like Twilio, for example. And they're a little bit more expensive. I think phone numbers are about $10 per month on Lindy. And somewhat to be expected, we don't have as much in the way of things we can customize here. Like there's nothing around voicemail, interruption handling, or any of the fine tuning that you would expect to be able to play around with in a dedicated voice agent platform. So this is the compromise that we have with Lindy, is that because it's a general AI automation platform, we have a huge amount of other stuff that we can do. The amount of integrations we have is absolutely incredible. And if you're building voice agents as part of a wider automation workflow, it's a really good platform. The voice realism is pretty good. It's as good as any of the others. But really where Lindy is going to excel is on the integration front. So if I just go in here and I'll give you a sense of kind of how broad the range of integrations we have are. So Lindy, for example, you can fire up a computer, connect it into any of these tools. We've got scrapers that you can fire up. Absolutely incredible, the range of stuff that you can do on Lindy. So a few things worth being aware of with Lindy. Now, I love using Lindy for kind of general AI automation. It's an incredibly powerful platform. But the reason I typically don't use it for voice AI use cases is that it generally gets a bit cost prohibitive. So for $75 a month on the Pro plan, you can see we only get 30 phone calls a month, which is very expensive if that is your main use case. Even if we go up to $200 a month, we only get 100 phone calls per month. So if you're doing anything at scale, it's probably not going to make sense using Lindy compared to using a dedicated voice agent platform. But as I say, for general AI automation stuff, it's pretty phenomenal what you can do with it. Latency is not bad. Again, it's not the best I've seen. I've not done a standardized latency test on Lindy, but anecdotally from when I've used it, I would probably put the latency at around about 1 second. So there is a bit more of a lag compared to using something like a Vapi or a Retell, where you can really fine tune the models and get the latency down, but it's not bad. It's very usable for just kind of little use cases where you need to incorporate voice AI as part of a larger workflow. So both of these are great options for building voice agents on, and given that you can try both of them out for free, I'd recommend doing that to see which one's going to be a better fit for your use case. Now, I'll drop links to both of them below, as well as the side-by-side comparison that I put together. And if you'd like to watch me live build the same voice agent on both platforms, as well as 4 other voice AI tools, and then live test them with real phone calls, you can check that video out here.